Does it look right? It's fabulous. Okay. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone this morning? Great. Good. Well, I'm so excited to be here at Florida Council for Independent Schools. Since I moved to Tampa, I certainly have come to appreciate Florida's independent schools. I'm from New York. I didn't know anybody who went to an independent school. Everyone I knew went to public school. So it's been a great eye-opener for me. Did you guys, most of you, stay here last night or drive in?
Drive in.
Drive in, stay here. It's kind of cool. You just go downstairs, you're in the airport.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. There's a whole food hall downstairs. Okay, so we have a very short amount of time and a very lot of information to cover. So I wrote a PowerPoint which talks about ADHD, specific learning disabilities, anxiety, and depression. And I included descriptions of what they are, and I included a lot of accommodations. And I wasn't entirely sure. I mean, I think that we need to lay the groundwork a little bit, and then I want to make sure that we can get through everything as much as possible. So just before I start, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I am from New York. I have a doctoral degree in psychology. In school psychology is where I come from, but I didn't know if I wanted to do clinical psychology or school. So the degree is school psychology, but I worked at Bellevue Hospital, and I worked at Schneider Children's Hospital, and I've worked in day treatment, which is sort of the fuse of mental health. And then I was the special needs coordinator at a really cool model public school in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which was a collaboration between the New York City Board of Ed, Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, who gave us the building, and a private foundation called the Beginning with Children Foundation. And it was that I have a dream school where you take kids and you follow them through college, or high school kids, and then they kept going back and back and back, and now that starts at preschool, because you got to catch them young to be able to take those kids. So had some pretty neat school experiences. Since I moved to Florida, I've gotten very into doing psychoeducational evaluations, and I have a real interest in attention disorders and learning disabilities. So this is right up my alley, and I probably spend half my time doing testing and assessment and feedback and helping families with accommodations. I recently was on the panel of the Decoding Dyslexia movement in Tampa, where they showed, it's called The Big Movie. And it's about individuals with dyslexia. So we're going to touch on everything today. I have an office in North Tampa and South Tampa. I do coaching over the phone. Got some people who work for me. And the last thing I just want to say about myself is that I struggled through school. I always just thought I was dumb. I had no idea there was a problem. About 5 years ago, I did a neuropsychology postdoc in New York City. I flew to Manhattan 20 weekends over a 2-year period, and I learned a lot about brain-behavior relationships. And I'm listening, and I'm learning, and I'm learning about birth injuries, and I'm learning about how any kind of oxygen deprivation at birth can lead to some problems. I was a bad speller. I have like some little memory stuff, and it all came together in college. Somehow I did well, and somehow I got to college and got through graduate school, but I always just thought I wasn't very smart. I was so forgetful. Turns out I had a really difficult birth. I came out all droopy on the right, and the right side, that whole motor thing on the right side, it's the language center here. No wonder receive and weird and all those IE words and embarrassment. I can't even remember how many S's and how many R's. And all sorts of things. So I recently wrote a book chapter talking about sort of overcoming this and coming to the realization and not letting it stand in my way. So I'm a little bit talking to you from the inside out. I never had any accommodations because we never knew anything was wrong. So I believe a little bit in succeeding in spite of yourself, but by the same token, I believe in reasonably leveling the playing field. So with that said, let's get rolling. Of course, I don't have a remote, so I will be walking back and forth to my computer to press go a lot. Okay, so we're going to talk about attention deficit disorder, specific learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, what they all have in common, and what works. Actually, you're sitting right there. Can you just be my arrow person?
Sure.
You see where the arrow is?
Sure. Now, which way does the arrow?
It might be to that way. But now I'm all inverted. Okay, so let's just start. We're going to zip through this. And last thing is that if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, I will happily send it to you. I have a clipboard up here. We'll pass it around. There's 3 places you can check off on the clipboard. One is if you'd like to receive the newsletter from our practice. We're always doing fun, interesting things, and I'm happy to include you on that. The second column is there is an ADHD parent support network that meets. It's a free meeting. It meets at Tampa Day School the third Tuesday of the month in the Tampa Bay area. So if anyone would like to be on the ADHD support group mailing list, I'll happily put you on that mailing list. And the third thing is if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint. It is not properly cited. Okay? So my only request if I send you the PowerPoint is that you don't do anything where it would be bad. That's okay. So, you didn't hear the beginning, but it's pretty self-explanatory. So, okay, here we go. ADHD. We recently have a new DSM, a new diagnostic manual, which changed ADHD diagnosis ever so slightly. What it did was, now you can have symptoms starting before age 12. It doesn't have to start before age 7. And they're not calling it predominantly an attentive type anymore. They've changed type to presentation. And the reason they've done that is to acknowledge the fact that ADHD tends to change over the lifespan. So, the little kids who are climbing on the file cabinets or running all around the classroom, by middle school they're still fidgety, they feel restless internally, but they may not meet all the criteria for a combined type diagnosis anymore. So they've changed that a little bit. But I think for you guys just to know that a child can still meet criteria even if that hyperactivity has gone away, and with any luck it will go away. So these are the three components. Inattention, which is an interesting thing because, raise your hand if you know a kid with ADHD who loves video games and can play them for hours. Right, so it's not that kids with ADHD can't pay attention, it's that they can't pay attention to what they need to, when they need to, for a long enough amount of time, right? They don't have good control over attention. And I just want to play you a quick video. This is Russell Barkley. He is a psychologist. He is my guru. I think he is the best. And this, I think, gives a nice overview of part of why these kids have such a hard time getting things done.
ADHD is not an attention disorder, it's a blindness to the future. It is a myopia to the impending future events. You are nearsighted in time, which means that the child and adult with ADHD are going to wait until the future is imminent. And then they will try to deal with it. But as long as the future stays out there, I don't have to deal with that. The closer it gets, the more I'm going to organize toward it. But I can't really do much about it until it's the 11th hour. And then I will race around, try to slap things together in a hat-dash manner to get it done. ADHD creates a nearsightedness to time so that the person with the disorder cannot organize to the delayed future, but only to the imminent future. And so everything in life becomes a crisis. But the crisis was avoidable, and no one has any patience with this because they see this as a moral failing. You could have chosen to get ready, but you didn't. It is phrased as a form of laziness, this layabout, ne'er-do-well, carefree, careless attitude that you could change if you wanted to, right? But we know it as the executive failure it really is. This disorder precludes you from organizing across time. So you live in the moment, and you cannot organize very large.
Okay, so there are a lot of clips that Dr. Barkley has online. This is from a presentation he did in Canada, and it just is wonderful. So, just to zip through these things, right, we know it's about 10% of kids who are diagnosed. About half take meds, but not for long enough. Part of what happens is there are side effects, the kids don't want to, they lie about it, they think they're stupid, if I don't take medicine, maybe I don't have it. There's so many reasons about what happens. It's viewed as a chronic condition that needs ongoing treatment. So while we sort of say 50% of people outgrow it, it's not exactly true. It lingers. To have a diagnosis, you need 6 symptoms. So if you only have 5, you no longer have the diagnosis and you've outgrown it. But not really, right? Okay, they recently expanded the guidelines, so now munchkins as young as 4 can be diagnosed. Next. Okay, so It's a problem of executive functioning. Do you guys know what executive functioning is a bit, right? It's what your frontal lobe's in charge of, right? It's what we've sort of learned falls apart not only in ADHD, but in anxiety, in depression, and in specific learning disabilities. So it is the brain processes needed to sustain problem solving toward a goal. And that's really, Dr. Barkley's been terrific about that. So it's really a self-regulation deficit disorder, because you can't control your attention to do what you need to do. You can't make yourself do what you need to do it. You can't sort of organize things well enough. You're maybe not the best problem solver in the world. Motivation falls apart. You know, there's all these different things. It's all here, your frontal lobe. Keep going. I'm going to skip a lot of the slides, but again, I will happily email this to you. Okay, so this is what I said before. See, the inattention problems typically stay. The problems with attention, directed attention, stay, but the hyperactivity decreases. So, keep going. All right, so one of the biggest problems with kids with learning challenges and ADHD specifically is they can't get the homework handed in, right? But the breakdowns can occur anywhere. So last night I was talking with a boy who, first he says to me, the problem is that I procrastinate so much. Okay, I want to do well, but I don't really want to do the work. And then he says, well, but I want to do the work, but I want to do the stuff I want to do, and I don't want to do the stuff I don't want to do. Then we say, well, but part of what happens is you get really behind. Do you know what you need to do? Well, that's a problem too. So do you write your stuff down? Well, not really. Well, I could go home and it'll be on Schoology, because that's the software that school uses. Okay, except for some of my teachers don't really put it on Schoology, they write it on the board. Okay, so and so the more we talk, the more we can tailor the accommodations and the help for this boy, because really, so last night, we decided we're going to do a check-in about getting things written down, and sort of this idea, I said, so what happens? He said, well, I sit in class and I think to myself, I should write this down. I said, then what do you do? He said, well, then I think to myself, nah, I don't really want to write this down. I was like, well, there we go. So not really sure how your goal of getting B's for this semester is going to happen if you keep saying no at that point. So we've got to work on that belief of, no, I don't really need to. So are you sure the aliens that landed in your backyard took your homework? Right? So there's so many excuses. How many of you know kids who do their homework and don't hand it in? Oh my goodness, is that the most frustrating and seemingly ridiculous thing? How could you spend so much time doing your homework and not want to hand in? It doesn't occur to these kids. Okay, please raise your hand if you're, go to the next slide, and then please raise your hand if you're going to be easily offended by my next cartoon, because I had a big moral dilemma about whether I could air it or not. So if you're easily offended, close your eyes, because I think it's really funny, and if it's not funny, then please forgive me, but I thought it was funny. Go. I'm not reading it out.
Quite an introduction.
I don't know why, but I was going through cartoons last night, and I just decided, anyway, carry on. I went to a really boring presentation last Saturday for the whole day, but the guy reminded me of Richard Dreyfuss, and so it was so fun, because he was a great presenter. Okay, so for ADHD, here's what we know. We need a three-prong approach. One is we've got to educate kids, and we've got to educate parents on what ADHD is. Shire Pharmaceuticals has a program called ADHD and You. It is a non-pharmaceutical department of Shire Pharmaceuticals, and they have terrific videos and booklets and ways to explain what ADHD is. It's not a medicine-centered department of Shire. So in terms of psychoeducation, there's CHAD, chad.org has great stuff. NCLD, right, National something for Learning Disabilities Council, maybe. We've got to educate these kids, show them a video, read a book with them, get parents to know what it is. Taking Charge of ADHD by Russell Barkley is one of my favorite books for parents. Okay, second thing is we know that meds work. We know that nothing works as well as meds except meds and behavior therapy combined. So I know it's a touchy subject for you guys. It's a touchy subject for everybody, but we know that meds are really helpful. And so if you have kids at your school taking meds, what you all can do is make sure that it's happening, facilitate it, even though we can't really push it, we know that it's helpful. Okay, so the third thing is that this whole executive function failure means that these kids have a hard time internally managing themselves, right? Which is why we use reward systems to externalize motivation, which is why we use reminders to externalize prompts, which is why we use checklists to externalize memory, right? Which is why we use proximity, right? Standing close to them, tapping them on the shoulder. All of these, the whole purpose of interventions and accommodations for kids with ADHD is you externalize what these kids can't do internally. And that's really, really important because it's overwhelming for teachers because we kind of need the kids, certainly by middle school and high school, to be increasingly self-sufficient, and so many of them aren't. It is helpful to think about ADHD as a developmental delay. It's about a 30% developmental delay of this executive system, which means that all of those organizational skills that most of the middle schoolers are struggling with, your ADHD middle schoolers and a lot of your learning disabled middle schoolers are struggling that much more. They're more like 8 and 9-year-olds, right? And now we put them in middle school or middle division or whatever it's called, and now they have all these different teachers, whereas their elementary school teacher, their lower school teacher was their mom or dad at school and held them together. So they actually don't need less support as they get older. In a sense, they need more support so that, here's the thing though, we want to give them more support so that they can develop routines and as much stuff as possible becomes automatic, which then moves it out of this place into this part of their brains, right? So they don't have to think about it so much anymore. The reason that we all think we can text and drive is that driving is a pretty automatic thing for most of us. You can talk on the phone and get in the car and start the car and put on your seatbelt and mostly back out of your driveway without hitting anybody and mostly get to where you want to go. Sometimes, I'm sure we all miss exits, maybe I'm the only one, right? Because that stuff has become automatic. We want writing homework down to become automatic. We want you get to class and you take your homework out to hand it in to be automatic. We want pack your book bag and put it by the front door or the garage door before you leave to be automatic. So as counselors and teachers, the job is to help kids and parents set up these routines so that they can become automatic routines and we can take it out of that executive center part. Okay. Obviously positive attention is huge. Consequences don't really motivate these kids except for consequences can create stress, can put the pressure on, which can set the ADHD brain into gear and make it work. And I was reading something in maybe the book called Spark by John Brady, and he was talking about how stress, I don't know what book it was from actually now that I think about it, but stress in the ADHD brain releases 2 neurotransmitters which get you moving. And so it really, they have done enough research to see what happens, which is why deadlines and breaking things down, but it can't be like a fake deadline, it has to be a real deadline for these kids because they won't respond to a fake deadline because it doesn't apply to me and it doesn't matter. Okay, next. Okay, so these are, and then we're going to move on from ADHD. Things I want you to know about ADD and ADHD. It's a heterogeneous disorder. Everybody doesn't look the same. If you can impart this to your teachers and say, so-and-so is a little bit of a daydreamer, it doesn't mean she doesn't have it. So-and-so is really good at in-class discussions but doesn't do any homework at home, he does have it. So-and-so is bouncing in his seat all the time, right? He has it. So there's so many different presentations of it, and again, it changes over time. There's not one type of individual with an attention disorder. A lot of kids have a problem with mental energy. Just can't get moving, can't get started, don't really want to, can't get started or can't finish, right? We'll talk about that in a bit. And it's a problem of inhibition, the kids who call out, right? They have what to say, they can't talk to themselves and make themselves wait. They haven't internalized their language to guide their behavior well enough, right? So they're the calling out kids. Performance and consistency. This also goes for learning disabilities, which is that some days things make sense and some days they don't make sense. When I was working on my dissertation in graduate school, I remember I'd go to my advisor's office and some days I had it, I nailed it, I made sense, I could explain the literature to him, knew what I was doing and I was on. And some days, you're like a village idiot. And I couldn't put one foot in front of the other, and, and I didn't really understand why. And it's so frustrating for kids. They have on days and off days. And hopefully they have more on days than off days, but we've got to sort of let them know it's okay to have a day where you don't perform well, provided your life is not based on high stakes testing. But otherwise, it's okay, and I bet tomorrow is going to be a better day. We have to forgive them and give them a shot again tomorrow. A way to think about all of these 4 topics that we're talking about today is, imagine you and I are going on a hiking trip, and I am wearing a 20-pound backpack, and that 20-pound backpack might be my learning disability, might be my ADHD. Am I capable of hiking this mountain? Yeah, I have feet, my feet work. Are you capable? Right. Who's going to get tired first? You're going to get tired. I'm going to get tired first because I've got the backpack on, right? Am I going to need to rest more? Am I going to need more encouragement? Right? I'm going to get tired. It's going to be a bigger feat for me to get to the top of the mountain than it is for you because I have a 20-pound backpack on my back. So what do? We provide accommodations. It's not that I can't get there. I can. I'm not, I have 2 legs and I can get there. But I need you to level the playing field for me a little bit. So I need you to give me some more breaks. I need you to give me some water, right? I may need to take my shoes off for a little bit, but I'm going to get there. That's an accommodation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. If I didn't have legs or if I couldn't see, I would need some different help in order to level the playing field, right? So ADHD kids are kids who typically can, but at the point at which they have to do it, it's really hard for them. Okay. They may certainly have problems with authority. It certainly can coexist with other types of problems. So because a person has an attention disorder doesn't preclude them having something else, and we're going to talk about that. They have a real hard time. What was I supposed to do? Because if it's not in their face, it doesn't exist. Out of sight, out of mind. Right? Anyone here have the issue where you file something? That's the end of that. So you have to keep everything out on your desk because if you can't see it, it's not there. Okay. Next slide. Yes? Oh, good. I reached a lot of people with that. Okay. So this is, right, R-A-B-K, B-K-A-R, right? So dyslexia, the biggest myth about dyslexia is that it's letter reversals, okay? We all know, or hopefully, is that letter reversals are okay through about 2nd grade. We'd like to see them go away for the most part after that. Kids with dyslexia can have letter reversal problems. The issue is that they have trouble with directionality, right? And they have trouble remembering which way the darn letter goes. Because they have a problem in that sort of alphanumeric, alphabet and number part of their brain, so the 3s and the E's and the C's, and the S's and the P's and the Q's and the G's and the J's, right? What'd you say?
All the letters.
A lot of the letters. Typically the capital A's we're safe on. Okay. And the kids who write, they'll write a lot of lowercase letters, but when they come to B and D, what happens? Capitals, right? Because they are different letters. Okay, next. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your help. Okay, so specific learning disability in reading. We have this new DSM-5. They have redone the specific learning disabilities chapter, and they've broken it down like this. And I don't know, every private school is different with what they require in order to provide accommodations. So, and sometimes it's looser and sometimes it's more formal. And if it's formal, I don't know whether you go by education law or if you go by, medical diagnosis. So I'm kind of giving you the medical diagnosis stuff because my experience with private schools has been that they want a diagnosis so that they can CYA and provide accommodations. So now it is impairment in reading with word reading accuracy, reading rate or fluency, reading comprehension. Those are like your 3 broad reading areas, and if anyone's familiar with the Woodcock-Johnson, we have an individual word reading test, a reading fluency test, and a reading comprehension test, right? There's a lot of ways. Teachers certainly do a lot of curriculum-based measurement. My guess is that it probably will come to your attention when kids are having a hard time reading. And oftentimes, while teachers may not know if a student is a low-achieving reader or a learning disabled reader, the flags need to go up either way. Dyslexia is really a problem with accurate or fluent word recognition, poor decoding, and poor spelling. And I'm a person who will diagnose dyslexia, not just SLD in reading, because sometimes it's dyslexia, it has a name, there's literature, it gives people a community, and there's programs we know that can be helpful for them. Okay, I recently tested the sweetest little girl, and she wrote sentences for me, and I had no idea. She was like 8 years old, and I literally had to say, "Sweetheart, could you please tell me what you wrote?" Because she's, I think 8 years old, and I really had no idea. And but I certainly see, we see this a lot with kids who have trouble writing, is they we say dumb down their writing or simplify their writing because they only want to use words that they can spell. And it's terrible to have a spelling problem when you're an otherwise bright person. Okay, so an impairment in written expression can have to do with spelling accuracy, and it can really be pretty horrific, right? Sometimes it's very phonetic. Sometimes they're kind of like they get the rules, but they over-apply the rules. There's so many different ways that spelling can fall apart. Grammar and punctuation, this same little girl was the cutest thing. Between every word there was either a comma or an apostrophe. So I asked her about it, and she said, "Didn't your teacher teach you about apostrophes?" I was like, well, yes, she did, commas. So she was just using them haphazardly, which was sort of entertaining. And then there's the people who can spell, and they know about grammar and punctuation, but they can't come up with an idea, and they can't organize an idea to save their lives, right? And those are the kids who really can't get started, because there's nothing happening. So they need our help. Do you know about Inspiration.com and Kidspiration? Those are really, really wonderful for helping kids to get rolling on the writing process. I have recently, I'm just going to stay in the writing and reading department for a minute. I recently listened to a book on tape because I spent some time in my car, and I have found that I get all the way through books I listen to, and I only get partway through books I read. I recently listened to the Dyslexia Empowerment Plan by a guy named Ben Foss, F-O-S-S, maybe an E at the end. And he is a dyslexic adult who has, I think, an MBA and a law degree, and he is a dyslexia advocate. And he has a website called headstrongnation.org. And he really is a proponent of when a child gets diagnosed with dyslexia, which again affects reading and writing often, we need to hammer them, in essence, with Orton-Gillingham-based intervention, right? So that's the Linda Bell stuff, that's Barton, that's Wilson, right? Those are like the three biggest names, and anything really Orton-Gillingham based. The Davis method is not well received. It purports to be the magic pill for dyslexia. We need to really give them as much reading and writing intervention as we possibly can in the beginning. And then at some point, like the goal isn't necessarily to make a dyslexic reader a typical reader. They don't have typical brains. Their brains are functionally different. So part of what we need to do is teach these kids early how to use accommodations. And what Ben Foss does beautifully on his website and in his book is he explains accommodations. He shows you through videos how to use them, how to teach kids how to use them, where to buy them. And he really is a proponent of audiobooks. He's a proponent of speech to text and text to speech. So trying to walk the walk, I turned on the text-to-speech function on my iPhone, and I have been listening to emails and listserv posts in my car, just select the text, and my iPhone plays it for it. It's very cool. So, but it's sort of a drag for kids, and I don't know if you've listened to audiobooks, but it can take a darn long time to get through a 9-hour unabridged audiobook. But if you can use this text-to-speech function on either a Windows computer or a Mac, you can speed up the reading, and you can pick a different voice. And so what you want over time for kids who are not great readers is to gradually move the speed bar so that the text comes faster. Because as he talked about in his book, he's in law school, he gets assigned reading. If he were to listen to it at a normal speed, it would have taken him 25 hours to do one night's reading. Like, you just can't do it. You can't get through it on regular audiobooks. But if you speed it up, you can do it like 300 words a minute if you get really good at it, and I've been gradually increasing my listening speed. And so it's pretty cool. But again, I like his website because he talks to us about how to teach kids to do it. It's a neat thing for the whole class. Like if you can get a teacher on board and get a whole class to have the opportunity to listen to an audiobook or use speech to text or text to speech, holy cow, it's great for everybody, and it also normalizes things for the students who's having a hard time. As I was driving over here today, and I said it to Cheryl, I realized I wrote this great presentation, and I was thinking back though, or maybe it's not great, but I hope it's good enough. I was thinking back to graduate school and thinking about my consultation class, which I thought was sort of a stupid class, and I didn't really know why I was there. And I think it hit me. I was there because it's all well and good for guidance counselors and administrators to have good ideas, but who's in the classroom with the kids, right? Not us, right? I'm a consultant. You guys are consultants. So part of what you have to do is be a good salesperson. I wouldn't have a business, I wouldn't have a practice, and no patient would ever come back to see me again if I couldn't sell that what I was doing made sense and was going to help them and was worth the investment of their time and their effort. So much of what I hope you can get from me today are some ways to talk to teachers, to sell the ideas to them, and to sell the accommodations to them. And, you know, Peg Dawson's book on Smart But Scattered, which talks about executive functioning, she wrote one for kids and one for teens. Late, Lost, and Unprepared. These are all, there's so many great books, Late, Lost, and Unprepared. Of course, the author's name is escaping me. She's a lovely, lovely woman. I heard her speak at CHAD. But these are great books for helping you guys to understand that the point of supporting these kids isn't to exactly have to support them for the rest of their lives, but it's to teach them to advocate for themselves and to teach them over time to be better and better in using accommodations for themselves. Late, Lost, and Unprepared. Joyce Cooper Kahn, thank you.
Joyce what?
Joyce, her first name, Cooper hyphen Kahn, K-A-H-N. Super readable. Psychologist, nice woman, down to earth. It's really what I like. Okay, next. Math. We know the least about learning disabilities in math. Dyscalculia is like the least researched and the least understood thing. So trying to distinguish between a low achieving math kid and a learning disabled math kid is quite something. But you can tell, and this is something that I often say, by second or third grade, if I'm playing a board game with a kid, I want them to be able to look at the dice and not have to count the circles on the dice, right? I want them to use the shape of the face of the dice, right? So kids who have learning disabilities in math, like they don't have any number sense. Like they may have a sense of 1 and 2, but beyond that, it just doesn't compute for them. It doesn't make sense. They can't just glance at it. Like an adult can pretty much glance. We can glance and know 5. We don't pretty much have to count up to 5. And so we have numerosity, we have number sense. Certainly education in math has changed. Parents are having heart attacks on a daily basis trying to help their kids with math. They're all losing their minds. They don't understand how it's taught. Doesn't make any sense. I am having a very hard time giving up the idea that automatic math facts is not a useful skill for children to have. I don't know how I would survive if I couldn't add and multiply quickly in my head. I listened to Schoolhouse Rock on the way in today. 3 + 3 is 9, but it's not. 3 × 3 is 9. The whole song. I only listened to it once, so anyway. But that's just so important. I don't know, does it make your life easier? Could you imagine, right? Like I'm adding up scores right, left, and center. If I couldn't do that. So, I really do still believe, I know calculators are great, that it is a useful skill for kids to have, and actually it's almost an accommodation. Let's teach these kids their basic math facts. It makes everything easier for the rest of their lives. But we know the learning disabled kids have a hard time with it. They have a hard time with reasoning, but I have kids who can't do calculation and they can't do a mad minute to save their lives, but I do word problems with them. I read them to them. I show them graphs and calendars and, cubic stuff, and they can pull it out. They just don't have the rote stuff. But they can think mathematically. I'm always happy to see those kids. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so I'm not really going to go through this because I want to get to the accommodations, but you're going to basically see kids who are struggling, kids who aren't keeping up, kids who are going to the clinic or coming to see you during academic subjects, kids where the teachers can't read what they're writing. I suspect you know what to see when kids are struggling academically. Sometimes you're going to see behavior problems. That's a good thing just to keep in mind. And sometimes when we resolve the learning problems, funny how the behavior falls into line. So we have got to look, you know, is it something they can't do? Is it a skill deficit before we even go and attack the behavior? Because it may not be a behavior-based problem. Okay. Anxiety. Okay, that's our friend Polly Vulcan. Keep going. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, anyone ever felt anxiety? Yeah? Only 4 people have ever felt anxiety. Okay, so the child with anxiety may feel persistently and uncontrollably worried. It may interfere with school, they may be preoccupied, they may be perfectionistic, so many things. Keep going, we're going to zip through these quickly. There's all these different types of anxiety. Yes?
May I ask a question?
You may.
Okay. What do you usually say? I mean, and you might not come across this, but I mean, I have some parents that'll come to me and say, my pediatrician says my kid has anxiety. And I mean, and it's hard for me, they want the accommodation in the classroom for some respect, and I say to them, I say, you know, you really need to have that looked at by somebody that's, you know, giving the testing and things. I mean, how would you recommend?
Well, I would ask a question. I would say, okay, how is your child, how's the anxiety manifesting? Like, how do you, like, not in a challenging way, but tell me how you know your child's anxious so that we can see it here. You know what I mean? Like, what are the symptoms? Like, do you know what he's anxious about?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I mean, specifically, the child wouldn't sleep at night and would run into the parents' room. So it's not even school related. I mean, the child's like a B student.
I think that it's a matter of talking to the parent and saying, okay, well, what kind of, sometimes you can say to a parent, what kind of accommodation would you like?
And then start there.
Because you could say, wow, that's really terrible, right? You're going to show empathy first, and you're going to say, wow, that must be really hard. Do you have a sense of what he's anxious about and how we might be able to help? Because with something like that, which may be transient, right, it may be coming and going, you may say, you could do something as simple as, would it be helpful for me to check in with him once or twice a day for the next week and see if that's helpful? You know what I mean? Like, it can be, you don't necessarily need a whole big plan. I understand parents might push for it. But the coming into parents' room at night, you know what I mean? Like, you've got to get more information.
Agreed. Yeah, no, and I know that's kind of a weird question to ask in abroad. I just, I mean, our school is very, you know, we've gone through some transitions, so the whole having a plan, we're revamping exactly what requires that, you know, so it's hard for parents to actually, you know, grasp that idea that we need active guidance.
Right, and parents are like accommodation crazy right now, and everybody wants accommodations. One of the things Ben Foss also says is that, you know, like extended time is the cheapest, sort of, not laziest, but it's like a half-assed accommodation, which some people need and some people don't need. And a lot of kids don't need it. You know what I mean? And it's not an appropriate accommodation or for a lot of kids. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what you think would be helpful. Because sometimes if you open that dialogue with a parent, like, we don't know that this child's going to have anxiety for the next 3 years. This child might have anxiety for a week or 2. And we may be able to problem solve it. But I also think it's reasonable to put on the parent to say, well, what accommodations would you like and how do you think that will be helpful? Because that's a hard question for a parent to answer. Or they may know and you may be able to say, you know what, I really think that that's something that we can do and it's not a big deal. If that makes sense? Okay. So, again, there's generalized anxiety disorder, which is just that free-floating misery. Social phobia, where they're afraid of specific things. You know, I'm worried about my parents, I'm worried about spiders. I have had so many kids who are afraid of throw up, of vomit, and I don't know the name for that specific phobia. It's quite, what?
I think it's emetophobia.
Yeah, it's got like a lot of things. Separation anxiety, panic disorder, OCD. I'm treating a lot of kids with OCD. And then the fun of selective mutism, right? So anxiety takes many, many forms. You might see approval or attention-seeking behavior. A lot of times kids can't identify it, and they really need us to spend some time with them, helping them to figure it out, because it's awfully hard to do any intervention or make it better if you can't figure out what they're anxious about, right? Do you know about the What to Do When series? Okay, so it's from Imagination Press. One of the books is What to Do When You Worry Too Much, What to Do When Your Brain Gets Stuck, What to Do When Bad Habits Take Hold. If you just type into Amazon What to Do When, there's about 8 of them. And my recommendation recommendation is that you all buy one of those books, read it. It is the shortest course in cognitive behavioral therapy you could ever buy at a level everybody can understand, and you'll be like, oh my God, I totally get what it's about. So if you're having trouble knowing how you kind of treat these things in a pretty straightforward way, these books are workbook friendly. The high school kids are insulted if I bring them out. You can get away with it still with middle school kids a little bit. But they are great books to help kids manage worry, and it's like a worry monster or a worry bully, and it tells you lies, and you kind of tell it to shut up, and you talk back to it, and you get to be rude to it, and you tell it to stop planning these unrealistic worries in your head, because most of them aren't going to happen. And when you have like a worrying kind of brain, it makes things up, and so you learn all sorts of ways to manage anxiety. We're going to keep going. Just keep going. Okay, depression, right? Kids do get depressed. It's not just an adult thing, but it can present a bit differently. So a kid can be depressed most of the time, but can go to PE and feel okay. Kid can be depressed most of the time, but be okay in reading, because he likes to read, and it's an outlet, right? Kid can be depressed most of the time, does okay at lunch, or vice versa. So know that a depressed kid isn't depressed 24 hours a day. And sometimes you see irritability and quick to anger more than you see such a sad mood. But it's something to keep an eye on. Obviously, with bullying, with suicide attempts and all of that, we have to just be extra alert to kids who are showing signs of depression, kids who are falling asleep in class, who haven't done it before. We really need to be alert to it. And know what questions to ask. And if you just sort of pull up a Beck screener, you guys should probably just know the questions in your minds. So in the course of talking to kids, you can say, you kind of ask questions about the future, you ask if they're feeling guilty about stuff, you just sort of ask some of those kinds of questions, and you can get a sense, and then figure out where to go from there. Keep going. All that executive functioning stuff is affected by depression. Your brain just doesn't work as well. Everything slows down. I don't know if any of you have ever been depressed, but I can tell you that it's really hard to get out of bed and get anything done because this whole part is just not functioning well. So the competent, capable kid who suddenly isn't competent and capable, we kind of want to look at depression. Okay, so what are we going to do? For depression and for anxiety, we're going to check in with these kids. And you guys are the perfect people to do a quick morning check-in, or pick a teacher or another administrator who the kids like. Let them check in with you. That's a legitimate accommodation, is a morning check-in. How you doing? What are you looking forward to today? And try to get them to focus on something that they're feeling pretty positive about. A mood check-in. You could get a little mood log. Kid could stop by, or he could have it with him in class, and a couple of times a day, you just want to know what the mood is like. Because if we find out that every day is fine and Mondays are el stinko, well, let's find out what's happening over the weekend, and let's do some investigating and some problem solving. So a mood check-in helps a kid to know what their mood is. Maybe at the end of the day, they're like, wow, I saw you 3 times today. I was pretty happy all 3 times today. Maybe I'm getting better, or I'm miserable, what's going on? We can look at the antecedents and the behavior and the, you can look at it a little bit because you have a little bit of data. Everybody likes data these days. There you go, got some data. Let's just acknowledge feelings and moods. Nothing makes all of us feel better when somebody says, wow, that's pretty frustrating, or holy cow, what a stressful, whatever it is. That's so important, and don't underestimate the value of that. But I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir at this one. This is a time when more time, you might not think a depressed kid would need more time, but depressed kids do need more time. But again, accommodations for depression aren't necessarily going to go on forever, because hopefully the kids aren't going to be depressed forever. So getting the private school version of a 504 plan, maybe for right now, until things are better, this is what we need to do, and we're going to look at it again in 3 months. Same thing with homework. Sometimes it just has to be adjusted because the depressed kid or the super anxious kid just can't manage it. So we figure out, I often say, mastery doesn't require copious amounts of writing. It's one of my favorites, right? Mastery doesn't require copious amounts of writing. When you have a depressed or super anxious kid, or a kid with dysgraphia who has writing problems, that's something you could say to a teacher. Is there any way that we can make sure that this student gets the concept without doing a boatload of these? Is there any way that he or she can demonstrate to you that he's got it, and that you could reduce the homework load a little bit? Trying to anticipate issues that may arise. And another thing, depressed kids, they kind of lose interest in everything. So if there's any way that you can convince a teacher to let a student do a project in an area of interest, at least you can get a little bit more buy-in from the depressed student. Okay. Visualization. I don't know. I mean, I don't really know how much time all of you have, and it's going to be different for everybody, but part of what's going to happen, I'm sure, is kids are talking to you and, you're like, So teaching them a little bit about visualization, right? The worry monster, that's a visualization thing, right? We tell off this imaginary thing in our head that's causing us anxiety. That's visualization. Imagine the sadness melting away like an iceberg. That's visualization. Let's draw an iceberg. Right? And let's imagine the sun coming up and melting it into the water. That's what's going to happen to you. That's what we want to have happen to your sadness. How can you make that happen? Oh, you could sit next to somebody at lunch who you like. Oh, you could walk your neighbor's dog when you get home from school. Whatever it may be. There's a lot of beliefs that go into the anxiety and the depression. I'm a failure. Really? Tell me how you're a failure. Well, I failed this test. Does that make you a failure, or did you just fail this test? Well, let's look at your other grades. Oh, look, those are A's and B's and C's. So, you know what I mean? And you look at evidence to challenge some of their beliefs. Challenge negative thoughts and help students think about things from other perspectives. What would you tell a friend in a similar situation? That can really be helpful, right? What would a friend tell you? And then I find that some kids like to write, some kids hate to write. But if you sometimes write these down or encourage kids to write it down or let them sit at your computer and type some of these, truthful thoughts up or the negative thought with the positive thought and just teach them that's like just a simple 2-column approach. I'm a failure, that's the negative thought. What's a realistic thought? I failed the spelling test, I didn't fail everything, right? And let them walk out with that piece of paper. Now they are not a failure, right? Now they failed one test, they're studying for the next one, and maybe they have a plan for going on. Okay. So I want to just take a minute to talk about interventions, accommodations, and modifications, right? An intervention is a specialized reading program, a specialized writing, teaching a skill that isn't there, right? A modification is for a child who can't do it and we don't expect them to do it. So if you have a kid with if you have a lower IQ kid, for example, maybe you're going to give them a different curriculum to follow, but you're going to include them in the mainstream classroom. You're going to provide some modifications, and when that 8th grader goes to apply to high school, you're going to have to put on their transcript, we made modifications, right? Accommodations, which is really what we're talking about more today, is how do I level the playing field to make it fair game for these students? So what my experience, again, with private schools is they might have somebody come in and do some intervention, or if you're lucky enough to have a reading specialist or a special education teacher at your school, you can do, some of the interventions can happen at school. If you're a real inclusive community, then maybe you're making modifications for some kids because that's important. But the bulk of what you guys are asked to do, I believe, are accommodations. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So an interpreter would be an accommodation. Probably you don't have that, but that would be an example, right? Because the student can understand, they just can't understand it in our language. A sign language interpreter, for example. Text to speech, that would be an accommodation. Extended time, that would be an accommodation. Separate location, some flexible scheduling, although I'm still not sure if you do flexible scheduling, so a student takes a test and then has a break and then can finish the test, how they don't cheat. I once cheated in college because I had to walk from my French classroom to the professor's office, and there was one word I couldn't figure out, and I went into the bathroom and I looked to see what that word was because it was killing me, and I was so angry. You know what I mean? But who's to say that students don't do that, right? It's my only time in college, though, and I never did anything in graduate school, but that's my one thing. But I can only imagine, because I've talked to, how do you maintain the integrity when you're making accommodations for people, and it's hard. But it's also hard when somebody has the class 2nd period and somebody has it 6th period, right? That's hard too. All right. I just said that. Keep going. So these are sort of 5 main categories of accommodations: extended time, different scheduling, change the setting, change the manner of presentation, and the manner of responding. So changing the manner of presentation is, we can read you the questions on the math test, right? We can read you the questions on the social studies test. This is not a reading test. And that's okay. And for the learning disabled kids, that may be important. And that's even something that you can think about for some of the depressed kids because their attention is shot. But if I sit with you and read you the questions, right now I'm providing an accommodation because your brain's not working so well, right? I'm not going to give you the answers, but I'm going to sit with you and read it with you because your motivation is shot. Whatever isn't working so well, we're going to level the playing field. Because the goal of education, in my opinion, while we want them to be independent, is broad literacy, right? And broad knowledge. And I often say to the learning disabled kids, I don't want you to miss out on the content. So let's watch the movie, listen to the audiobook, let mom and dad take you to the museum, go see a play, listen to music from that time period. I want you to do anything that you can do to get the information. I don't care if you're not going to eye read, ear read. Find another way to get the information in there. I don't want you to miss out on the content. Yes? Okay. Manner of responding as well is dictating is certainly an option. There's a lot of kids who have trouble writing because of fine motor problems, because they have, not dyslexia. There we go, dysgraphia. And, forming letters is so difficult, or it's effortful, or they're unmotivated. Let these kids go home and use Dragon, or just use the speech software on their computers. And that's still writing. They can still spell check it, they can still edit it, they can still come up with the ideas, they can still formulate sentences, they can still use correct grammar. Kind of like, who cares? Because, not who cares, they need to be able to write, but let's get them through their homework. Let's get the job done for these kids. So again, as administrators and counselors, part of your job is, can you talk to teachers about these things to make life a little bit easier for these kids who struggle? Yes?
Sometimes it's more the parents that are fighting that type of...
Because it's the lazy approach, isn't it? Yeah.
It's one of the hardest sells sometimes, because it's like, I want to see what they have in their head.
Right, and I think that you can ask them if they're willing to experiment on it one time. I think if you go to that Headstrong Nation website, you can get some ammunition or listen or read Ben's book. Because it's called the Dyslexia Empowerment Plan, and even though it's focused on dyslexia, it's really for all learning differences and learning disabilities, and I think that he does a really nice sales job of, well, what's the point of this, right? I had this argument with my brother and sister-in-law like 3 years ago because my niece was having a really hard time reading a separate piece, and I was like, I'll just go upstairs and read it to her for an hour. Like, why not? Because really she needed to get through a separate piece, and if I read to her for an hour and she read the rest on her own, she'll follow along with me. Let's get her done. Did you have a question? No. Okay.